third panel. We've asked the witnesses to make an opening statement of 5 minutes. We'll hear from the witnesses and then turn to the questions. But unfortunately, Ms. Duraid, I think it's the earphones are not working, so we will have her at a later date. However, we're lucky to have Ms. Alissa Pavia with us, who's the Associate Director, Atlantic Council's North Africa's program. Ms. Pavia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Esteemed Senators, by way of introduction, my name is Alissa Pavia and I'm Associate Director of the Atlantic Council's North Africa program based in Washington, D.C. It is an honor to convene with you today to deliberate upon the pressing issue of the major refugee and migration flows affecting the Middle East. I will pay particular attention to North Africa and the Mediterranean, as this region is a world hotspot for migration and is often overlooked. Chers collègues, je vous remercie pour cette invitation et pour attirer.
Dear colleagues, I would like to thank you for this invitation and for the opportunity to shed light on this important issue.
Understandably gravitates towards the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the resultant humanitarian crisis displacing over 1.7 million Gazans, we must not overlook the broader issue of significant refugee and migration movements elsewhere. There exist numerous other vulnerable populations forced to migrate due to the dire circumstances in their homelands, groups all too frequently overlooked by the international community. I speak of those migrants and refugees who cross the Mediterranean annually, seeking refuge and better future elsewhere, enduring perilous sea voyages that endanger their lives and those of their loved ones. Since 2014, over 22,000 individuals have been reported dead or missing at sea, rendering the Mediterranean route the most treacherous for global migrants. Esteemed Senators, migration is an ancient facet of human history, with people perpetually seeking better conditions beyond their homeland's borders. Yet certain compelling factors, the so-called push factors, drive mass migration, such as war, famine, poverty, climate change, and political persecution. African and North African nations grapple with these challenges, fostering conditions driving vulnerable individuals to embark on perilous Mediterranean journeys. The last decade has witnessed recurring surges in migration from North Africa to Europe, each cycle presenting distinct challenges and varied causes behind these forced displacements. The year 2023 in particular marked another of these cyclical uptakes. Migration from North Africa to Europe surged threefold since 2022, leaving Southern European nations scrambling for effective solution to the migrations quandary. Efforts to comprehend the sudden uptick reveal a new migration origin in North Africa, Tunisia. While Libya traditionally held this mantle, Tunisia, particularly the port city of Sfax, has assumed prominence as a significant transit hub for vulnerable individuals from sub-Saharan Africa. According to the International Organization for Migration, this year Tunisia witnessed a staggering 260% increase of departures compared with the previous year. Concurrently, the number of Tunisians seeking migration has similarly risen, signifying a renewed willingness among local Tunisians to live their homeland too. While the reasons compelling migration deserve scrutiny, today I seek not to dwell solely on the push factors. Instead, I implore your attention toward the dire condition migrants face in North Africa, with a particular focus on Tunisia, given its current role as a migration hotspot. Moreover, I am to propose recommendations on how Canada can provide assistance. Approximately 21,000 sub-Saharan individuals, including migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, are estimated to reside in Tunisia. However, since Tunisian President Kais Saied assumed office in 2019, the plight of these migrants has markedly worsened. A turning point for the worse occurred in February 2023, when President Saied made public remarks echoing elements of Kamas's racist Great Replacement theory, accusing Black African migrants of intending to alter the country's demographic composition. Subsequently, migrants faced persecution, with many forcibly evicted from their residence and dismissed from their jobs. Tensions between locals and migrants escalated further. Regrettably, the situation took a dire turn in July when Tunisian authorities rounded up Black African migrants from Sfax and forcibly expelled them, leaving them stranded for weeks in the desert bordering Libya and Algeria. Having personally communicated with some of these affected individuals, I received distressing videos, audio recording, and voice notes pleading for aid, documenting an unfolding humanitarian catastrophe. The stranded migrants endured scarcity of food and water, with only the Tunisian Red Crescent permitted access. While approximately 600 migrants have been readmitted to Tunisia, of the 1,200 that were expelled from one day to another, since then, the whereabouts of the remainder remain uncertain, with an estimated 24 fatalities. During this crisis, European leaders convened with President Kais Saied to discuss curbing the influx of migrants reaching Europe's southern shores. Shockingly, no mention was made of the stranded migrants, and an agreement was struck to financially support Tunisia's Coast Guard in intercepting migrants. Once again, the international system witnessed a failure as, quote unquote, Team Europe inadvertently empowered Tunisia's authoritarian leader, signaling that racism and human rights violations would not impede financial aid. Senators, I recognize the considerable challenges each nation confronts in managing surges of irregular migration. However, your influence lies in ensuring that global lives receive humanity and dignity, safeguarding migrants and vulnerable communities through mechanisms supported and financed by many among us. Multilateral institutions like the United States, bilateral agreements, and diplomatic and trade relations. Although Tunisia might appear distant from Canada, concerns about migrant treatment in Tunisia and the Mediterranean significantly impact the international community. Mass displacement wreak havoc across nations, disrupting stability and fostering tensions among countries. The rise in far-right populism often correlates with growing xenophobia towards migrants and refugees. Europe, a close ally to Canada, has faced significant challenges due to mass displacement, weakening its unity in the face of global issues. It's in Canada's best interest to prevent Europe from encountering such challenges, and it would inevitably strain Canada-European relations. Moreover, Canada has crucial ties with Tunisia, funding pivotal development and counterterrorism projects. It's imperative that Canada taxpayer money doesn't support criminal acts by Tunisia's National Guard. Firstly, Canada should ensure that institutions operating in Tunisia work diligently to locate and repatriate stranded migrants. Both the International Organization for Migration and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees bear responsibility for their welfare and repatriation. Secondly, during bilateral discussions with Tunisian Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Defense, Canada must stipulate that assistance won't be provided if it contributes to human rights abuses, such as forced expulsions of migrants. Lastly, the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights should conduct a comprehensive study on humanitarian aid to Tunisia, reassessing whether the current president, Kais Saied, meets the criteria for the state assistance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have a list of senators wanting to ask question, and as our previous practice, I would like to remind each senator that you have 5 minutes for question and for answer. We have Senator Jaffer, followed by Senator Gerber.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witness. You spoke of a specific example of Tunisia, and I'm really glad you brought that to our notice, because I all along thought that Tunisia was more forward-looking, but obviously not with African refugees. And you made some recommendations. Do you have any specific immediate recommendations, because you made many, that the committee should write to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from what we've heard from you? Or you may want to think about that and submit it to the clerk later, but immediately, what do you think that this committee should do? Because this is a very serious matter.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. My understanding is that the committee is working on a report that you intend to make public. And may I suggest and may I recommend that in that report you do mention the issues that I brought up with regards to Tunisia and with regards to the forced displacement of migrants and the worsening of the conditions of refugees and migrants in Tunisia. The reason why I bring up Tunisia is because Tunisia is a hotspot right now. It's the main departure point for migrants from North Africa to Europe. But I also want to stress that after 10 years of democratic transition, Tunisia is facing a dire democratic backsliding with the current president, Kais Saied. I'm happy to go more into detail later if that may interest you, but I do believe that there cannot be any recommendation towards ensuring a better livelihood of refugees and migrants in Tunisia without addressing the political situation and without asking that President Kais Saied backtrack on the democratic backsliding that he has so far embraced.
Ms. Pavia, you have spoken so passionately, and you get to me, and I would really like to do something, but, Tunisia is not the only country. We have many, many countries that are doing terrible things, and so the challenge is that we can't really, in a report, or maybe the committee will decide to do that, just pick on Tunisia. But I was wanting you to sort of make general recommendations as to what we can do. What kind of recommendations should we have for refugees generally?
That's an excellent question, Senator, and I understand where you're coming from, and that that has been an issue as well in my day-to-day endeavor when I focus on one country only. As I mentioned, though, however, right now, there's about 21,000 sub-Saharan Africans in Tunisia, right? And in July, Tunisia expelled 1,200 migrants to Libya and Algeria. And so, one recommendation that can be done in the report is perhaps not solely focusing on Tunisia, but on North Africa generally as a region. And that this region and the different leaders in the region should look at diverse ways to ensure the better livelihood of migrants and refugees in their countries. But also, I would also urge that as an ally to Europe and the European Union, Canada can urge allies to foster better relationships with countries in North Africa, but that these relationships also entail safeguarding the lives of migrants. And Europe has often been accused of and criticized of not taking into account the livelihood of migrants coming from North Africa and investing in what's called the externalization of its borders. And that means delegating to third countries that don't necessarily respect that do not have the same standards or when it comes to human rights that perhaps Europe and Canada have, right? And so with the externalization of the borders, then there's a delegation to other countries of even accounting for the well-being of migrants. And so this has been often criticized to the European Union. And one way that you can reverse this path is to ensure that, for example, the mechanisms by which refugees are assessed upon entry happen within the countries in the European Union and not in third countries.
That's very useful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gerber, followed by Senator Omeidwar.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. You spoke at length about Tunisia, and indeed the situation in Tunisia has worsened from a political standpoint. And I myself have seen those videos circulate on the internet. They were horrible when it comes to the way refugees, or not refugees, but those who inhabit Tunisia, be it students or workers who've settled there. They're not even refugees, but it's horrible the treatment that they've received. And we also know that the main point of origin towards Europe is Libya. There are hundreds of thousands of refugees and refugee claimants, including children, who go to Libya with their sights, with Europe in their sights. And apparently there are over 200,000 displaced persons currently in Libya. Could you also speak to the situation of refugees in Libya? What could be done to better take care of this significant population of displaced persons in Libya?
Thank you, Senator. I'm glad you brought up the issue of Libya. As you rightly mentioned, the situation in Tunisia is dire, but there are other countries in North Africa that face also dire conditions, and one of them is Libya. We know, for example, that recently Libya was struck by a terrible natural catastrophe, the floods in Derna, which I think have left, between 8,000 to 10,000 displaced, and there's about an estimate of 4,000 people that are missing or reported dead. The situation in Libya is fraught because there is a political quagmire that impedes the immediate solution to any refugee crisis. And so the two sides, Libya is currently divided into two, and the two factions have an inability to find common ground when it comes to important solutions like that of refugees and migrants. And it also becomes difficult for external countries, like for other countries like Canada or countries in the European Union, to engage with Libya because there is not a unitary government. And so what happens with many European countries that do want to engage with Libya is that they find themselves unable to find a point of contact to as a reference for these issues. And so going back to what I was saying earlier about the externalization of the borders, because the situation is dire in these countries, Europe has a tendency and did the same thing that is doing in Tunisia, did the same thing in Libya in 2017, where the European Union funded the Coast Guard to attempt to halt the migration flows. But what this led to was that then the Libyan Coast Guard, created, detention camps and for refugees and migrants and left them there. There's reports of terrible humanitarian conditions that these people that they are facing right now in these camps in Libya. Another thing that happens is that they find other ways of reaching Europe. So this solution doesn't work. So what many have advocated for is for Europe to stop externalizing its borders and funding coast guards in countries such as Libya and Tunisia, where these leaders are not trustworthy, correct? And instead taking upon themselves to find durable solutions to the migration issue. One way is also ensuring that the livelihood of people in North Africa improves. And for improvement to happen, for example, we believe, Western countries believe that democracy should flourish. And so fostering and ensuring that democracy continues to flourish in North Africa will ultimately improve the livelihood of many people in North Africa. And that is one way that countries in the European Union and other countries such as Canada can hope to, let's say, affect the people in North Africa.
Well, in the meantime, and as we wait for democracy to improve, the fact remains that there are about 200,000 displaced persons in Libya. You spoke about 21,000 displaced persons in Tunisia. Can Canada do something, anything in the meantime to help these persons where they're at currently as they wait? I don't know if there are camps per se, but what can be done on the ground? Things aren't going to change when it comes to democracy overnight in those countries.
That's true, Senator. It is also true that we need to make sure that we do not overlook the issue of democracy, and that we want to make sure that in the long term, democracy is still something that we want to foster in North Africa. However, you're right. There are things that need to be done in the short term. And as I mentioned in my remarks with regards to the recommendations, there are organizations that are working in North Africa, and these are, the United Nations, the International Organization for Migration. And given that Tunisia is unfortunately not on the list of priorities for many countries in the world, the best way that your committee and Canada has to help people, migrants in these countries, is to go through multilateral fora, is to go through the United Nations and the IOM, and perhaps even local civil society organizations. And in the meantime, try to push North Africa and the issue of migration in the Mediterranean as high on the priority list of global issues that, for example, Canada and Europe can work together to solve. So recently, just this past week, Canada and Europe had a summit, and they came up with a list of priorities and global issues. And nowhere on that list that they mentioned the Mediterranean, migrants in North Africa. But one way that you can help secure that the livelihood of these people is improved is by ensuring that the Mediterranean, which again is the most treacherous route for migrants around the world, that it becomes a global priority and issue. And in the meantime, push for more subtle solutions, right? So just like you're doing with this committee, and by issuing a report, write about it in the report, and make sure that you provide assistance, either financial or technical assistance, to those organizations that are operating in North Africa. But I will say also this, that there are still 600 migrants when they were expelled from Tunisia that are unaccounted for. One thing that Canada can do is be in touch with their representatives at the International Organization for Migration and ask them what is happening with the 600 migrants that Tunisia expelled, because they are unaccounted for. They lost service on their phones when they were expelled. I know 600 were readmitted to Tunisia, but the others are unaccounted for.